these are my friends. Come along with me, see how the story ends.
Hey, all you professional hippies, welcome back. This week we have an honorary guest, a guest that I think all of you will fall in love with, because I myself have tripped and fallen in love. When we first met, Henry, it was an interview, and I was the interviewee. So ironic that the roles have switched now. We ended up going to a really cool soiree off the back of, what was that?
South by Southwest.
South by Southwest. You got to see me fumble over meeting one of my heroes in East Medicine. And so I want to do kind of a proper introduction, but I also want to make it a little informal. So if you guys tuned in last week and you're excited about learning really anything around the topic of how to build a business in psychedelics or learning more about psychedelics, I think Henry's going to be an incredible resource. He's the founder of Tricycle Day. We were kind of talking shop before we got on the podcast, but I think you could make an argument for the fastest growing psychedelic newsletter.
That is fair to say. Yeah,
certainly. Right. And kind of going to blows with some of the biggest names out there. So we're going to be bouncing around, kind of talking about different topics. And just to kind of do the promo up front, the newsletter is free. So if you guys want to go check out, it's bi-weekly, not bi-weekly, it's twice a week. Right?
Yeah. Bi-weekly is one of those tricky words that really doesn't tell you anything. But yeah, it's 2 times per week.
Right.
It goes out every Wednesday and every Sunday.
And the best part is that the newsletter actually has substance. So it's one that I read every time it lands in my inbox, and one that I think if you guys go ahead and subscribe, and we'll tell you how to find it. I mean, you can obviously just try tricycleday.com and sign up there. But really excited to dive in, kind of like, I've had an up close and personal look at what you've done, but since been removed from that process. So excited to hear kind of about like what you've been up to lately, and just kind of bounce all around. But if you guys are interested in becoming a budding mycologist, our friends over at North Spore are down to hook you up. So head over there and check them out. If you use the code Professional Hippies, you get 10% off. Not only does it benefit you, because fun guys are fun guys, it benefits us. And if we need nothing else in this world, it is capitalism. I mean freedom, I mean money. So go check it out. So Henry, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. And that was an excellent ad read, I might add. As someone who also runs a media platform that lives and dies based on sponsorships, I got to hand it to you. That was well done.
Yeah. Well, they're awesome. I genuinely love North Spore.
Totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a great company. I've got the shroom tech right behind me.
No doubt. That's what I'm talking about.
And a bunch of the capsules too.
Well, next time you buy stuff, maybe are they hooking you up? You getting a little?
Yeah, I get a little handout here and there.
Yeah, we gotta make it up our way up to Maine and go surfing with them boys. Those are some good homegrown boys that are just love nothing but mushrooms. And that's the cool thing about probably the industry that you're tapping into. Like, what have been some of your, I don't know what direction to take this in, 'cause I'm so excited to like talk about different kind of points and stuff. But like,
go all over the place.
What have been some of your favorite personalities that you've seen shine through? And if you want to give kind of any pretense to like the newsletter, maybe for like context, so folks understand kind of like what the newsletter is about and how we'll be talking about fits into that. So maybe we start there and then exploit personalities.
Yeah. Okay. So the rundown in the newsletter is, it is a easy to read, fun to read, easy to consume roundup of the most important news in psychedelic research, policy, and business. I mentioned that it goes out twice per week. The Wednesday issue every week covers that week's news. And the Sunday issue is kind of my shot at original reporting. I do an interview-based series, which is not too dissimilar from this, except that the end format is written. And it's every issue is meant to be consumed in 5 minutes or less. So it's easy. And I try to differentiate. I made a very intentional decision at the beginning, taking an audit of what else was out there in psychedelic media, that I wanted to do something that was lighthearted. And some people might take issue with that, being as, these can be considered sacred medicines. But seeing that we were at this like precipice where, psychedelics are really going mainstream, and there are going to be a lot more new people, like the pie is growing, there are going to be new people who don't know what to make of the information overwhelm out there. I wanted to do something that was appealing and attractive to that crowd. So, it's injected with humor. There are memes. It's written in not perfect English, sometimes intentionally. So that's kind of the gist on the newsletter. As far as like people I've met, that Psychonaut POV interview series has really afforded me the opportunity to meet like people from all aspects of this ecosystem, community, industry, if you want to call it that. It's, I've spoken to venture capitalists. I've spoken to like a Gen Z mestiza practicing indigenous medicine. So it really ranges the gamut. It's hard for me to pick a favorite, but I think my favorite aspect of the experience of doing those interviews is the diversity of opinion. Sometimes I get like a lot of negative pushback from readers from one thing, and then I have the total opposite opinion the next week, and a different segment is mad, and a different segment is like, yes, more of this. So it really goes to show that people talk about a psychedelic community. I actually don't believe that there is a psychedelic community. I believe that there are many factions within, and there's a lot of infighting. And for all like the talk of connectivity and we're all one, we got a lot of work to do still.
Yeah, that's a great point. I saw that on full display at the MAPS conference.
Oh yeah.
I expected to show up there and it'd be kumbaya, but I mean, there was definitely some headlines that made it, especially like how the way it closed down.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like seeing people being very confrontational, and it's all, I think, and I'm curious to get your perspective, but from my point of view, it's all in kind of the service of the same thing. They all want to move it forward, just with different kind of past intentions and trying to safeguard from other people. Kind of crabs in a bucket is what it kind of feels like.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting metaphor there. I do agree to an extent, but also I see the validity in the points that everyone makes. Yeah. Particularly the one that you're talking about right now with like indigenous peoples wanting to not be left behind, extracted from, or abused in any way. That's a tricky subject. I think when you're talking about, I'll just like kind of wax a little bit on my view on it. I think when you're talking about indigenous practices, absolutely there should be reciprocity, but I think it's also easy to take that view to the extreme and paint the entire psychedelic medicine landscape with the same brush. And that's not entirely fair. Something like MDMA or ketamine has no traditional history associated with it. So you can't really approach those the same way as you might with ayahuasca.
Fair point. So where do you come up with the memes?
Yeah, that is like, when you're like running a business, you're always trying to like figure out how to standardize things, like come up with an SOP. And that's one that I have not been able to like really nail down to a science yet, which is probably a good thing. That's probably why it's fun, is it still feels artistic and creative. But I've got a few different ways that I like tend to come up with them. The first one is like kind of the most magical, and I think probably also the most applicable to this audience, which is I've found that some of my most creative ideas come when I am disengaged from the problem, so to speak, like not sitting in front of the computer or on my phone, like come up with a meme. It's more when I'm like taking a walk outside, breathing in the fresh air, or I'm at the yoga studio doing my practice. I get a lot of ideas for the business as a whole, and also specific like creative content type ideas there. And then more tactically, memes also come from like being a consumer of memes and just like remixing them. Because that's like what memes are, right? It's not about creating something totally new. It's about taking something that exists in the culture, in the zeitgeist, and like putting a spin on it.
So you have just like memes kind of going through maybe your feed?
Yeah,
just
like
as a part
keep a swipe file of memes.
Yeah, nice. Because man, I'll tell you, I don't know that I've seen more memes like genuinely from like a meme page in the context that you use them in. I don't know if I can give you 10 out of 10, but I would say a solid 8 or 9 out of 10
Thank
land
you.
really well. And I'm like, damn, that's done really well. That's why I was almost thinking, like, are you outsourcing this? Is that a part of your business?
I wish, man. I wish that I
could. Just have a funny man on retainer.
Yeah, not yet.
So yeah, I mean, what's been kind of maybe the and again, we can take this in whatever direction you want, but these are just some of the pressing things that have been on my mind. What's been the most challenging part about building this for you?
Probably like managing cash flow. For me, like the part of the reason you mentioned that it was like the fastest growing psychedelics newsletter, that's not an accident. I've been running this since January, and I have never once paid myself $1 out of the business. Every single dollar that I've made has gone back into the business, whether that's in the software and infrastructure that it takes to like actually publish it, or mostly like the lion's share of that is going into marketing expenses. So, I run ads myself to bring people into the newsletter, and then the newsletter monetizes by selling ad space to businesses in the psychedelic space. So I would say like the challenge, to go back to your question, is like, is that the right, like controlling the brakes and the gas pedal there? Like, do I want to keep pushing the marketing spend and growing faster and faster and faster at the risk of like, running out of my cash reserves? I'm basically living off of savings at the moment. Or do I want to kind of accept where we are and turn it into more of like a lifestyle cash flowing thing? And what goes into that calculus is like, do I feel like it's hit the potential that it can? And my answer to that, it keeps going back to like, no, I think it can be a lot bigger.
Yeah. That was one of the things I wrote down that you spoke to earlier, is like, hey, the pie is growing, right?
Yeah.
So where do you see kind of, I don't know if market cap would be kind of the correct projection there, but when you're kind of, it feels like you're intuitively projecting this.
Yeah,
right? I don't think it's difficult to put metrics to it.
I mean, I have metrics that I'm like shooting for, but they're not based off of like some in-depth analytical review. It is more intuitive based on my sense of the newsletter market. Some of the biggest newsletters that cover general news, like they kind of cap out in the 1 to 3 million subscriber range. So I don't see a niche publication covering psychedelics alone getting to that scale, at least in the foreseeable future. But I do think it could get significantly larger than it is right now. And right now I'm at about 32,000 subscribers. I think that it can easily, I don't think it will exhaust after 100,000. I think it can keep going from there.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
What got you? You talked about earlier you were doing a different type of podcast before this, and now you're into doing a psychedelic newsletter. Like, what made you? What was that transition like? What had you want to make that leap? Because that's a pretty, from the topic you were doing before to doing this now. That's a interesting transition.
Yeah, it is. And I appreciate you asking me that. Thanks. When I was doing that podcast before, I was a full-time yoga teacher. So I had a podcast that was about yoga, and kind of similar story as to why I decided to launch it. It was called Dharma Talk. And just like now, leading into Tricycle Day, I had started reading a lot of newsletters and just become a fan of that medium. It was the same with me. I'd like kind of just gotten interested in podcasts at that point. And I was looking around for a yoga podcast that was interview based and just didn't see one that I really jived with. So I launched my own. And my favorite thing about it was the doors that it opened for me. I just felt like, it provided so much credibility, even though I don't even at that point, I had no idea what a good sized podcast was doing in terms of numbers. It didn't really even matter to my guests either. They're like, oh, you have a podcast? Yeah. And so I would reach out to my yoga heroes and be like, you want to be on the show? I can talk to you and share your opinions with my audience, which is of an undetermined size. And they would agree.
Just curious, did you have to do yoga while you were doing the podcast, or was it like an interview?
I was always in a handstand while I spoke.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it was a real yoga podcast.
It was real.
Well, so was just from
That's
knowing
awesome.
you too, right? Was the yoga before the crypto venture, or was that?
Yeah, that was before.
Okay.
Yeah, crypto was a brief interlude in between. I'm sure it was for many people. I still have some crypto, but I'm not involved
me too.
in a professional way.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for that stuff to go to the moon, baby.
It's kind of popping right now.
Yeah, I'm still in a place where I'm like, okay, it's just there doing its thing. I guess in a lot of respects, it's just kind of reserved, if I don't know,
Yeah, I
Fiscal
still
market
believe in
collapses.
the fundamental philosophy behiand that, so I'll hold on to it.
Isn't it weird too, though? It felt like there was this feverish point. Well, like, what was that? Like a year ago, 2 years ago,
You
that it
mean like
was
the
like,
peak euphoria phase?
yeah,
That was like 2021.
2021,
Yeah.
and it's just kind of taken this like backseat where people are like, okay, I guess the dollar's still a thing. I mean, not to the loyalists, but
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think it's
Turns out the
good.
dollar still works.
I think it's good it did plateau. That means it could be a little bit more manageable, like being able to understand it a little bit better. Once it was everywhere, peaking valley, everyone's like, go crazy, buy this,
Yes.
Everyone's coming up with a new coin. It was just chaotic,
It was
but now
very
it's kind of
casino
settled
vibes.
down, especially after the FTX bullshit,
Yeah. Yeah. That was tough. That was a tough time for a lot of people.
I'm locked in the BlockFi bullshit. So
You're locked in?
I had a lot of my stuff in BlockFi, which got hit by FTX. So it's going through all the bankruptcy stuff. No,
so what does that mean? Your stuff's just locked in there until they.
If I had it, you have an investing account and you had a wallet. I just recently was able to pull some of my stuff out of the wallet, but if you had an investing account, it's still going through bankruptcy, and I'll be one of the last people paid. I'll probably get $1 out of my funds. I'm just expecting that to be a loss, out of
you write
everything that was in there. I was able to get a few $100 out of my wallet, but you have everything in the investing account because you want it to gain interest. So
yeah,
boo me.
But it gained interest because they were able to like borrow against it,
but because he was able to transfer into this other account to his ex-girlfriend who was having orgies at the same time with my money. So
it was funding the orgies.
Nothing wrong with that, buddy.
Enough KY jelly to fill a pool.
There you go.
So are there heroes?
The crypto has no use cases. You're proving them wrong.
That's right.
Not to ground the conversation, but are there heroes in the psychedelic realm that you're still looking to kind of like get connected with or use this as a platform to reach out to?
100%. I'm patient though, and I'm not going to force them. But some of the obvious ones. Actually, I will say, I'm not going to say who it is, but I recently got connected to one of those heroes that I like. If somebody had told me I was going to speak to this person when I started this newsletter, even 10 months ago, I wouldn't believe it. So that conversation is happening in less than a month. The name will be available in public soon enough, but I won't say now. But
tease me.
Definitely one of those.
Tease me, Daddy. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that you mentioned that, right? Like you never would have thought, you started this 10 months ago. You never would have thought, there's people that we've had on since we started the podcast. We never would have thought we would have on, but it's just like you start it, you get it going for a while. You finally ask like, hey, I think I'm all right enough that they could come on. Mm-hmm. And then you're surprised, but you're like, they probably looked up to you and they're like, oh, he's doing something. Sure. This looks like a cool thing. And the same thing with us. They looked at us, and it's just interesting that we built it up in our heads like, they probably won't. And then they're like, yeah, sure. We'll come on. It's just interesting that.
Yeah. I don't know if that's like a manifestation of the imposter syndrome, or if it's just like assuming that these people are so busy that they don't have time for media appearances. But either way, I'm stoked that it's happening.
I think the cool part too about like different media platforms is it gives people just an opportunity to express their opinion unguarded. I mean, a little bit more of a trust factor, I think, with you, that you're going to kind of give them an authentic representation of their beliefs and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I know when people come on our platform, they're like, oh, cool, this isn't kind of an interview. Like, we're just going to bounce around to whatever we want to talk about. And I don't know. That's just interesting to see how it's received to some people. You'll see them the longer you're interviewing them. And I'm sure you see that in your interviews where they start to relax and they're like, okay, like I'm not on CNBC or Fox News here. Like it's just two people talking, having a conversation. Have you had any interviews kind of go like a little weird on you at all?
Actually, no, I haven't. And I think probably part of that is one thing I always do to disarm the guest at the beginning is let them know that I'm never going to publish anything that they haven't seen. Mm-hmm. So even though it is much more edited than say a podcast or like a YouTube interview, they get the final say. And if they ever feel like misrepresented, then I won't publish it.
Yeah.
So people open up after that. And the other thing that I do is I usually my interviews, like the final product is a 5-minute read, but the interview itself is usually, 45 minutes to an hour at least. So there's a lot in there where we're just kind of like warming up and getting to know one another that doesn't make it into the public version.
Yeah. Where do you see like the evolution of the newsletter kind of going into? Are there any other like products that maybe you'd be interested in launching, or media kind of like spin-offs associated with that?
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot, actually. When I started, I kind of entered the newsletter space naively, which generally I actually think is a good thing when you're starting a new business, because if you know everything, like every challenge that's going to come up, it can be intimidating and kind of push you not to do it. So having a simplistic view can be helpful in that way. But I thought that, I could make this work simply based on like ad arbitrage. Like I said before, like acquire subscribers through ads and then monetize them through selling their attention to advertisers. And that still is, to this day, the leading revenue stream for Tricycle Day is the sponsorships. But with that cash flow problem and wanting to grow faster and everything, I realized pretty quickly, like, I wanted to supplement that with other revenue streams. And so now it's like the sponsorships. I also do some affiliate, which is, basically another form of sponsorship, just paid on different terms. But more recently, I started doing digital products. So, selling products directly to the readers. I started with a weekend event where I brought in 4 different experts in various practices related to psychedelic integration for like a weekend back-to-back workshop. And that was like my first foray into it, just kind of test the waters and see if people would be interested in buying something like that from the Tricycle Day brand. And lo and behold, they were. So I took that and kind of ran with it and played with the format a little bit and just released a second product rather than it being a digital event, an on-demand evergreen digital product, like a very low cost, low ticket entry product, which really my goal with it, apart from educating the readers, was to win back the cost of acquiring a subscriber more quickly. And that product is about harm reduction.
And so tell me about that product. Like when you say harm reduction, like it's an evergreen course that they buy into?
Yeah,
or
a short 1-hour course. It's called Have a Safe Trip. And it's like, I'm very upfront in the beginning, like, look, I'm not trying to convince anybody to use psychedelics. That's never my intention. I believe that's a personal choice. But if you are going to, I think it's beneficial to everyone if you are educated on what the risks are. So I go through that and talk about different strategies for mitigating and managing those risks.
And so like one of the things that I think is interesting about like what you've decided to go all in on is like owning the newsletter, right? And what I was kind of probing towards is a lot of times like a newsletter can be a function of a bigger brand, right?
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
like you've just taken that arm and you're like, hey, I'm going to own this because I see the opportunity and just that alone. And I guess it's potentially what I'm seeing here is a good thing that you're not getting shiny object syndrome and being like, hey, here's all these other visions that I could spin this off into. But have you just kind of toyed with the idea of like, hey, what could this lead into? Do you afford yourself the opportunity to kind of like just daydream a little bit about what that could build into?
Yeah, for sure. I think about it a lot. But I do try to anchor back to what the original vision was, not just for the sake of sticking with something because I said so, but because I come back to like my belief in what was needed in the market. And I still think that the newsletter is what is needed, free information. But yes, I definitely think about that in a media business where your main monetization is advertising. Basically every time I have a new advertiser come through, I think like, oh, that's something that my readers are interested in buying, which means that in theory, I could be offering that too.
Right.
Which is kind of a cool thing. Like you can use like the resonance of a given ad as sort of an experiment to see if that's an avenue you want to pursue in the business.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
So like physical products, those are some really popular ads on Tricycle Day, like legal plant medicines, things like, Kana supplements and like there's like a kratom beverage that was pretty popular. So like if I wanted to get into physical products, like I have that market research, at my fingertips.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, right? Like you have all the data. So like white labeling something could definitely be a possibility. I just had like the weirdest visual of a Buc-ee's. I was in a Buc-ee's the other day, and so you have like Tricycle Day, and like Buc-ee's probably did the same thing. They probably saw what was selling the most in the store, and they went, you know what, we're resourced enough, and let's make some corn nuggets. I guess corn nuggets are what people in Texas are into, or chips and
Trader Joe's does that too.
Do they?
Yeah, that's their model. They white label everything, and then they can sell it for a little bit cheaper.
Yeah. I think they go to the people that make brands, like they go to someone that makes Lucky Charms, and they're just like, they just say, we want all these BS ingredients taken out, and then just put this in there. And then, so they just take some of the ingredients out and then relabel as a Trader Joe's product. It's pretty neat. I'm curious, most people are familiar with Bicycle Day. I am just curious, like how did we come up with Tricycle Day, as the name? And were you on a tricycle one day having a good time, like the Bicycle Day, or where did that come from?
No, it's you got the reference. Not everybody does, so that's actually intentional. It's basically like an Easter egg. It's like a little nod for if you know. If you're listening to this and you don't know, Bicycle Day is the name given to the anniversary of Albert Hoffman's first intentional dosing of LSD. He took the LSD and then he got on his bike, not trike, and run home, basically.
Which is a lot easier than you think.
When you think about it, it probably would have benefited him, huh?
Yeah. Maybe on that other leg. I don't know. The first time I tried it, I was like, this is going to be really, really difficult. And it's not that bad. I was like, it's a little harder to see cars whizzing by you when they're coming, but otherwise, like, to maintain the path is not too hard. I was very surprised.
I can't say that I've tried personally.
When was your first experience with psychedelics? Because if I remember correctly, it was pretty recently, right?
Yeah, it is fairly recent. I think, for people working in this space, definitely I'm on the greener side. My first ever psychedelic experience was in my late 20s. And it was in the context of yoga. One of my yoga teachers / friends, I was a yoga teacher too, so we're kind of like all peers practicing together often, said like, hey, you can eat some of these mushrooms and we'll practice together. And I did. And I have to say, it was pretty unremarkable. It was not like a mind-blowing experience. It wasn't really anything to write home about. So it didn't get me like all that excited about psychedelics that first time. And I kind of forgot about it. But not too long after that, I had a completely different experience that blew the doors of perception open for me, also in the context of yoga. So if anybody, is listening to this and doesn't know much about yoga beyond like, fitness classes on a yoga mat, there's like there's thousands of years of philosophy and history behind it as well. And so as a yoga professional, I was pretty steeped in that. And I kept reading about these like very esoteric ideas of, non-dual states and cognitive absorption. And actually in the eightfold path of yoga, the final stage is something called samadhi. This is actually what yoga practice is meant to take you toward. And it's also called yoga. It is the state of yoga. And the way it's described in the text is essentially like your sense of self disintegrates and merges into the unity of consciousness. And to me, that was an incredibly compelling idea, something I was very intrigued by. But at the same time, I was like, I'm living in New York City. I'm a yoga teacher hopping from class to class. I don't have the luxury of disappearing into a cave to be in the darkness for 5 years. So I'm probably never going to experience that. And that's okay. I kind of resigned myself to that. But one time having one of these conversations with one of my yoga friends, she was like, you're not going to believe this, but I found the cheat code to samadhi. I was like, do tell. What's the story here? And she explained what she had just done. And in maybe a week or two, I found myself at a ceremony getting ready to smoke the venom of Bufo alvarius out of a crack pipe. And I was never the same.
So according to DEA, the yoga is a gateway drug to smoking out of a crack pipe.
Right. That's right. Yeah. So I went from like basically zero experience with psychedelics.
You went from zero
to-
experience to like, I need to hurry this up.
The
Infinity.
punchline
A
was
little bit.
so rich on that one. I just didn't see the crack pipe coming in there. I mean, we're tracking along.
That's
You
how
got
you
me
do it.
hook, line, and sinker, and there's the twist. Okay, that's good.
She caught you on a Wednesday for sure. That wasn't a Friday. Like, hey, I got this. You were like, we got to hurry this up.
So you
That's
you did it in
awesome.
the context of like a proper ceremony. Like you had a
Yeah.
facilitator,
It was.
and
That's cool.
Yeah, but it was also like it was a little ceremonial island in the middle of the hustle and bustle of New York. I went to the upper let me see. It was the Upper East Side to a doorman building. Like people just coming in off the street. Doorman seems to kind of know what's going on. I go up to the apartment, and when I walk in the door, wafts of Palo Santo. The facilitator appears with his massive golden retriever, all white garb, red sash.
This was a
red
nice
bandana.
place.
Oh, it was a nice place. Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the people that
But I
get
didn't really
VIP
have
at
any idea what I was
Bonnaroo.
getting myself into. I had done like a little bit of research, but he actually encouraged me not to, so that I wouldn't have any sort of false expectations that would influence the trip either positively or negatively.
funny enough, I did the same thing with Dylan when it came to combo, and I don't know if that helped or hurt him on that one when he was hugging the bucket.
I still don't know.
Have you ever done combo, Henry?
I have,
Yeah.
yeah. I've
Those are battle
a few-
scars. Yeah.
I don't know if you can see, but yeah, I've
My
done it a few
sense healed
times.
up.
Yeah, I've done it a few times too, and every time I do it, I think, you know what, I'm good. And then the opportunity affords itself some late date in the future. Then I'm like, yeah, I haven't been on the edge of death in a while, so let me just invite that back into my life.
Does it feel that way for you?
That's the most violent experience I've ever had as a human being.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, maybe someone's got to.
It just
Yeah.
felt like it felt like just a really bad sickness for me.
That's how it felt to
Just
me
like,
too.
this is like the worst case of food poisoning you could get within the next like 15 minutes.
Yeah, but it's also really contained, so it's
Yeah,
kind of okay.
yeah.
And you like signed up for it, so you're prepared, and it just feels like
You
concentrated
know it'll
intensity.
end. You're like, it'll end. It was kind of funny. I told my my stepdad about it. We went to a show the next day, and I told him what I did, and how it's supposed to help with all this, vision or in your stomach and all that. And for whatever reason, I just looked across the way, just down the aisle from us, and there was an unopened tall boy can of Bud Light. It's just been sitting there. I go there, it's cold, and I was like, "Look what I found." He was like, "It's the froggy vision." Dude.
Yeah, your hunter senses.
He's like, "You can find it's finding the good stuff." I was like, "Oh snap, you're right."
Eagle eye.
So
Did you take the Sananga eye drops afterwards?
Yes, we did that. I did it before.
Yeah, we did it
Part is the
beforehand.
worst for me.
I didn't like that. I think he was just doing that to get a good laugh out of everybody.
yeah,
Out of himself, honestly.
You did it before?
Mhm.
I did it before because I was waiting my
Okay.
turn. So he was like, here, we'll just do it now while everyone else is doing their turn, and then you can get up and go. And that was awful. I didn't like any of
it's
that.
like squeezing like jalapeno juice into your eyeballs.
it feels like there's
Yeah.
like little hands punching you directly in the cornea. It was like if
The
someone
devil came up.
Tiny
couldn't
ones
fit their whole
with razor
fist, it
blades
was
on the
just,
knuckles.
they're like, okay, let me shrink this down and just Mayweather.
Yeah.
Right.
It felt like to me how when you like pour 151 and then you light it, to make a cool shot, but it was the devil spit in my eye and then lit it and goes, "You're gonna like that."
Yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal. It's definitely for me way more challenging than the
Yeah. Oh yeah.
actual
They're like, this helps with
combo.
cataracts. I'm like, are we sure? Is that what it's doing?
Yeah, the jungle has a lot of cool stuff to offer, but that one I think I'm good on.
Yeah, my eyesight's fine. I have vision
Interesting
insurance.
that's
It'll take care
harder.
of
That was like worse for you guys because the combo for me, the way it hits my system, like it every time I've done it, it legitimately feels like it's bringing me right up to the edge of death. And I'm like, okay,
really.
if I'm dying here in a way that like ayahuasca or DMT, the other ones, it's kind of like a letting go experience, but it feels like your soul is kind of, leaving the meat sack, so to speak.
Yeah.
That one feels very visceral where the whole meat sack's screaming like, what the fuck? Why did we,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Your face also blows up. like a big old
Oh
basketball.
yeah, so does
too.
mine.
Yeah.
You also
It gets
yours that
inflamed.
too?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it gets
mine
swollen.
It
didn't.
looks like got a botched Botox job or something.
The beautiful picture we had afterwards was because I was the last one to do it, so I was still. Everyone wanted to do a picture before kind of everyone started leaving after the ceremony, but I was still in the middle of it. And so they took a picture of me over the bucket and then did their group picture. And so they photoshopped me over the bucket in the middle of the group. Everyone's like,
Yeah. Oh my
God.
Even worse too.
You're like the mascot of the group ceremony.
I'm just shirtless, like, oh my God.
Well, we had friends that wanted to host the ceremony at the house I was renting in Tampa. So I was like, yeah, sure, come on, And there was, I don't know, 4 or 5 people we didn't know they're doing, like maybe like 8 or 9 people total.
Pretty random.
So about half the group was, randos and super awesome people. And then they do their combo, and a couple of them had upset tummies. And normally that's not a big deal. One of them ends up shitting themselves, and the other
That'll happen. That'll happen.
Apparently. And so we get one of them in the shower, fully clothed. I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on. We just get them in the shower. I assume water will take care of a lot of this. Another person is like, I think I'm going to shit myself. So we get them in the bathroom. So they're next to the person in the shower that has shit themselves. And then
put all the shit yourself people together, quarantine them,
just get them away from me. Together. And at this point, my face is blown up. The toilet has clogged, and no one told me this until it was at that, like, what's the term where water like will bubble? It's
the surface tension is the only thing holding it from overflowing.
I'm convinced one more drop, like to the point where I'm like, I don't even know if a plunger is going to help us here. But the whole house is in a frenzy, in a panic, because I don't have a plunger.
And you can't put the plunger in anyway, because as you said, you've already filled the capacity.
So
even displacing the volume of the plunger is going to result in a catastrophe.
Best part of it is that the air vent for the house is maybe a foot away from the toilet. And so, I mean, I'm bugging out. One, I don't own the house. Two, like, come on, shitty water in your air vent. And it had a anticlimactic ending. Every neighbor on the street got a knock, and they were running down the street with plungers because they saw the panic in my face. And by the time we got back to the house with multiple plungers, it had taken care of itself and decided the combo
crisis averted.
The combo gods
saved by the spirit of the combo.
Dude, that frog.
That's right. That's right.
Right up to the edge. And be like, no, you're good.
Yeah,
you're good.
Right to the edge. Just give you that fear of life and death, and then let you know you're okay. Cradle you.
Random thought popped in my mind. So as you're building this business, have you yourself been faced with like any feelings of imposter syndrome? Maybe reaching out to guests, or like, who am I to build this business? I'm not, or I'm not enough of an expert to share these opinions. Anything like that come up?
I'm like pretty good at not having to face that, or I don't know if good is the right word, lucky, in that I don't face that too often. But I will say there are a few things that sort of set me off, and I've really worked on my emotional reaction to them. And the main one is trolls. Trolls really dig straight into my heart. Like, whether it's one thing if it's like a random person who served an ad, because like, yeah, of course, they didn't sign up for this. But what really gets me is like when somebody who signed up for the newsletter gives like really negative feedback because they're just completely and utterly offended by the views of somebody who like it's not even my views. I'm just platforming someone, and they're just absolutely,
how dare you?
How dare you? And I used to let those things get to me. And to be totally honest, like I'm still working on it for sure. But more recently, I've been able to let go of that. And it's easier because with the size of the newsletter now, like the voices of dissent are very much drowned out by the positive feedback that I get. So, I can just like kind of quantify it and be like, okay, I'm still on the right track.
Yeah. Whereas before, like maybe
but isn't it interesting how like you can hear like 10 positive reinforcing things and one negative one, and the negative one is the one that like you remember.
You're trying to drift off to sleep. Hey, Henry.
Yeah.
Do you
Misogynistic.
feel like that's the one, like you're like, oh, all positive. I don't really need to reply to these. Hey, thanks. But then someone sends a negative and you're like, I got to write a paragraph on that one.
Yeah, you got to tell them why they're wrong.
Tell them that they're wrong.
Like, give them the business. That's interesting. What do you think's been helping you the most outside of business building activities, contributing to the business? Kind of like we talked about earlier with the memes, like the yoga practice, spending time with the kiddo. Like, what's kind of keeping you grounded through all this?
Definitely, the yoga practice is like my go-to hack that I try to tell everybody who's trying to do something that's like starting from zero, creating something of their own. It's really important to have an outlet where you can disengage your conscious mind and develop that sense of connection to yourself. Because I think that's where like the creativity of our subconscious comes up. Psychedelics, are kind of like work the same way, but you don't maybe don't want to do psychedelics constantly. Maybe you do. I'm not going to judge if you do, but for me, I'm more of like a once every few months kind of guy. So that's been really helpful. And then as far as like grounding and just understanding that business is not everything. Yes. Like time with my son has been a forcing function for that I've been very grateful for.
What does the work-life balance look like? I mean, do you have predetermined hours that you're like, hey, I'm going to focus on the business here? Are you sprinkling it in? Because I mean, I would assume, like I've been in the trenches, I've seen, how efficiently and effectively you work, but I would assume when you're putting out 2 newsletters a week, that it'd be easy to allow that to kind of balloon up, maybe perfectionism creep in.
Yeah. Something that I'm working on right now is like trying to standardize the hours that I work. Because you're right, like when it's your own thing, it's really easy for the work to just expand to fill the entire container, which is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. My son imposes some constraints, obviously, because I need to watch him, but he's also in daycare twice a week. So I like try to stack, like bundle the work into days when he's not around or when my wife can watch him. But yeah, like something that I have to like artificially impose because it's not like naturally there is like, when am I going to stop working at night? Because like it's really easy to fall back on that time. Like, oh, sun's down, I got like all the time in the world, but I also really care about like my sleep. So there are all these different little levers and switches you can pull.
What about from the wife side?
I don't have the perfect answer for it, but
what's the
working on
energy like from your wife? Because I would assume there had to have been a critical conversation at the beginning of like, hey, I'm going to put really everything into this, energy wise, financially. Yeah. There's kind of a lot on the line for you. And so I'd imagine your partner is a big part of kind of supporting you through that and potentially being
Absolutely.
a refuge. So what was that conversation like, or just kind of anything that comes up for you around that?
Yeah. Well, this isn't my first entrepreneurial project. So fortunately, my wife kind of knows how I operate and that I really do like to work when it's something that I care about and like driven by. It's very different from like, working a corporate job, which I have in the time that we've been together. And she senses that difference. And I think that she's supportive of me working more because she knows that it's something that I'm like intrinsically driven to do versus like I'm trying to answer to someone. And she's been supportive, not just emotionally, but actually helped me out with like actual business stuff too. Like she came with me to psychedelic science and was like, she's a very extroverted person, has a lot more ease with, hopping into new conversations, introducing herself. And also when you're not having to pitch yourself, but you're pitching your husband or your partner, that takes a little bit of the edge off of like the modesty, arrogance kind of dynamic. So yeah, she's very involved and as a sounding board emotionally, but also I like share tactical creative ideas with her and get her input. She's very insightful and kind of like almost prophetic in some ways. Like she has predicted things that I'm going to do months ahead of time, sometimes years ahead of time. And I like deny it tooth and nail. And then eventually I come to my own realization and she's like, yeah, I told you. So she's also incredibly patient in that way.
That's cool. Yeah, it's fun watching you kind of build the business, but I would assume as you're building the business, the business in return is building you in some capacity.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like one thing that you know this well, Colton, one thing that I struggle with is like outsourcing, delegating, and ultimately, if I really ask the deeper question of myself, like, what is that? It's trust. Like, I struggle with trust. And that has held me back in the past for sure. This business like has been mostly just a one-man show. And I've like flirted with, having different contractors involved. I've had agencies kind of help me out in various respects, but I've never really relinquished control. And I struggle with that. And so in many ways, I feel like that is the next step for this business, is for me to really accept that that is what is needed, not only for myself to grow, but also for like to best serve the audience and the mission of what I'm trying to do, which is to normalize this conversation around psychedelics, educate people so that they're not operating off of outdated information from the 70s.
Yeah. I think we could still put it all in the water. I think Timothy Leary was onto something. It was Leary, right? Put it in the water. Yeah.
Just put it in the water. It'll be fine.
He had some pretty aggressive ideas.
Forward thinking is what we like to say around here.
Take out the fluoride.
Bold.
Add the LSD.
It was bold.
Man of principle.
Putting in the water, actually, I think that's Rick Doblin. He says that MDMA should be put in the water.
Rick Doblin, yeah, right in the water. That's fine.
Yeah, and he's a contemporary. He's out there right now.
Someone's got to pick up the hand grenade and keep running with it.
Once it's in, it's in. Can't stop it.
And he's doing a pretty incredible job. I know that he's got critics, but anybody who's making big moves is gonna have haters.
I've really been astounded by his ability to hold the long game on that.
He's incredibly cool-headed about it.
I've listened to so many of his interviews, and I'm like, I learned something different about the guy every time. And you're like, the staying power.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And all signs point to MDMA being the first, if you don't include ketamine, the first psychedelic to be medically approved, and it'll happen next year. So it's working. His approach it's been a long haul, like you said, but it seems like they're about to cross through, maybe not the finish line, but a pretty notable milestone.
Yeah, we have a lot of different perspectives and personalities on the show that kind of speak to different angles. And I guess I'm curious to get your perspective, kind of looping back to one of the things you brought up earlier, is like what the market needs when it comes to psychedelics, maybe more specifically to psychedelic businesses. What do you feel? Granted, this is a very blanketed, just generic kind of question, but like, what do you feel like the market needs still?
I think that there are a lot of businesses right now that are preparing for a future state of the world. And I understand that approach. Like a lot of businesses, there are definitely a lot of needs out there. The biggest one, the most glaring, obvious one, is we have a global mental health crisis. It's very bad and undeniable at this point. And the standards of care in medicine, just are wildly ineffective for a big portion of people. That's why the moniker treatment-resistant depression exists. It's like its own separate diagnosis because the meds out there don't work. So I do think that the medicalization path of psychedelics is extremely important. And I understand why it's sort of leading the whole show. But I also very much believe, and this was my own personal experience, that psychedelics have a lot to offer to people who don't have any sort of psychiatric pathology. For me, I was not depressed. Of course, I went through low moods from time to time, and, I've been anxious and all these things, but I never went to a psychiatrist. I was never diagnosed with anything. And yet I was very attracted to psychedelics because I understood or believed, I went in with a preconceived notion that psychedelics could help me better understand myself and the inner workings of my mind. And I don't think you should need to be, clinically diagnosed to be afforded that right. So, people often ask, like, do you believe in psychedelic medicine, psychedelic legalization, or psychedelic decriminalization? And my answer is I actually think there's a place for all three. They should all happen. I think decriminalization should happen because like people getting prosecuted and put in jail for nonviolent crimes that really don't like make sense. Like it's obviously politically motivated and just a relic of an older time. And it's time to do away with that. And then legalization, handled correctly and trying not to like create a lot of loopholes for companies to exploit and extract, like that can be really beneficial because now you have like better quality control of products. So, I think regulated markets exist for a reason. And then the medical pathway, obviously, we talked about that. So I think the need out there is really on the policy side. There needs to be political will to create space for these businesses to come in. Fortunately, in my case, it's a media business. Information is free. There's no restriction around that. Thank God for the First Amendment. I have the freedom of the press to write about this stuff. But as far as actually delivering people products and in many cases services as well, they're going to have to remain underground until the politicians, our lawmakers can change the environment that these businesses want to operate in.
How far does that freedom extend when it comes to, say, like the evergreen courses, right? Like that's something that a lot of folks are kind of exploring for a means of supporting themselves and something they're interested in. Like how granular can someone go as far as like, hey, here's how you can grow your own medicine, aka mushrooms, or here's, like I see Dance Safe kind of like talk about their kits and stuff, but like how far does that freedom extend when it comes to explicitly outlining how someone can make, manufacture, or consume what is currently illicit substances?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a lawyer and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but my understanding is that as short of like hateful speech that's meant to incite violence, like you're really allowed to say anything. Where it gets a little bit dicey, and maybe this is more of an ethical than a legal guideline, is, I'm never going to give people medical advice. I would never do that because I'm not a doctor. Believe it or not, I'm neither a lawyer nor a doctor. So, I always try to just qualify anything that I say and say like, look, everybody's got personal, unique circumstances. And also you might be on other medications that are contraindicated or have some sort of drug interaction. So as much as your, physician may not be receptive to the conversation, that's where I got to point you for now. But general information, I think as long as it's provided for educational or entertainment purposes, is fair game.
For the business side, right? I've seen this happen with Florida trying to legalize marijuana and some other states doing it, where before it gets legal, like right where the voting starts happening, only a few companies are approved to do it, and it's usually something the politicians have their hands in, of course.
Yeah.
Would you rather have it become legalized and it becomes legalized quicker because only like 2 or 3 companies are approved to produce it, and it's because the politicians have scrutinized it and said, hey, these are the good ones and we can go about it? Or would you rather it take longer to become legal and regulations are put in place before it becomes legal and then any company can make it, but it's based off of those regulations that are put in place?
I don't think that there should ever be a time where any company can go out and produce these products. I think they should always be subject to vetting in a legal framework. So it's less about that for me and more about I think decriminalization needs to come first for that very reason. Because if there are only a handful of companies that are monopolizing or duopolizing the psychedelic market, at least people would be able to cultivate their own mushrooms in their closet or backyard. And that kind of helps with the pricing pressure there and the exploitation basically of that regulatory capture. I have actually, this kind of sends me on a little bit of a tangent, but this is my biggest complaint with the American government. I find it absolutely it's hard to even believe that the system exists in the way that it does, that companies can buy politicians' interests. Special interests to me are just, it's like blatant corruption, and it happens in every sector of the economy. And people just nod along and accept that that's how it works. It's shocking to me.
Yeah. I think that would be everybody's biggest complaint going on with that.
I mean, that's a weird notion that comes up frequently in my trips. Cause are you, well, kind of like in the industry or the collective field of psychedelics or whatever, like people speak to like, hey, they don't want us free thinking. And then almost every time when I'm in an altered state of consciousness, that does encroach in where you're like, yeah, I could see why if I was in a position of power, why I wouldn't want an entire society just freely thinking for themselves and trusting themselves and not trusting a larger entity. But I don't think it's because of any one person in the machine. I think the machine is almost conscious itself. And you'll see that it will frequently self-sacrifice in order for the good of the machine to keep eating and growing and influencing. I mean, that's the nature of politics, right? The machine.
When you say the machine, are you referring to human civilization, like organization amongst
more
people?
Of good old American government in general, right?
Okay.
So you have whistleblowers come out, but for every whistleblower, there's a lot of people in there thinking the same thing, and they know if they stand up for what might be righteous, that they'll be sacrificed. They'll be essentially become a martyr for something that the machine doesn't really give a fuck about, right? And so I think it's in the government's best interest to keep us dependent, to keep us reliant, and under the guise of we need the government, and in a lot of cases we do, right? Like I'm not advocating for just
and I think we do
laissez-faire.
I think, for the record, I think government.
Government's good. I just don't think big government is good. And
there's definitely government overreach. And I think personally, I believe that industry, like free markets, should be completely divorced from government. Yeah. It does not seem right or fair.
Like the bailout. Dylan and I were talking about that a couple of weeks ago. It's like, wait, we ascribe to this idea of a free market, and then the free market's doing free market stuff to allow, I mean, you got to burn, like ultimately sometimes the prairie's got to burn. Like that's just that's how the market resets. Like that's how we come back into balance. And they're like, no, we got a pretty good thing going here. I got some pockets I need lining, so let's prop it up. But yeah,
I think that it has to, just to touch on that too. I'm looking forward to that when it starts happening in the psychedelic space, right? When you start seeing that companies get so big in the medical space in this industry that like, is the government going to be there to bail these types of companies out like they've done for others? Or are they going to be like, oh, sorry, like you had to be on your own the whole time? Or are they going to leave the psychedelic space are they going to help the psychedelic space like they have other industries? It's going to be interesting once this does pop off and get really big. I guess it has to come to, are they going to have a big enough lobbyists?
Well, the money moves the markets, right? We saw that with cannabis. Once the states started tasting that sweet, sweet money, and they're like, oh, actually, no one is dying. Everything's fine. In a lot of cases, everything's better. And so I think if any government tried to step in now and take that revenue source away, which in a lot of cases is going to like schools and other kind of beneficiaries, those taxes, infrastructure, things like that. So I would imagine that psychedelics is going to provide at the price point that a lot of these companies are wanting to introduce it in. I would imagine the taxes are going to be pretty heavy on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the biggest risk that the psychedelic biotech pharma companies face is like the alternative of organic, natural psychedelic plants and fungi, which is, that's why it seems pretty intuitive, why Gavin Newsom in California might have vetoed that bill. They had bipartisan, bicameral support for decriminalization in California, and he said he wanted a medical framework in place beforehand. Now, if you put on your cynical hat and you say like, well, he has got special interests like lining his pocket, then let's play that out. I mean, it would be because those companies want to make sure that they can corner the market of people who need psychedelic medicine so that they don't just grow it in their backyard.
Right. And I mean, hey, I'm all for if I can take have a mushroom trip with guaranteed no nausea. Like that's cool. That's novel. That's something that I think there's a giant market for. But in a lot of cases, as it stands right now, it looks like they're just trying to kind of do what they did with insulin.
I agree with you. Personally, I totally agree. I think there is space for both. I think they will fulfill separate needs. And also just like different types of patients or users, like some people just really want to have the support of a clinical context that they know and understand. They want to, obviously this is a very different treatment experience than any other sort of pharmaceutical that doesn't induce a subjective experience. But still, you can, make it as similar and familiar as possible by having a prescribing physician and, clinical controls. And that's always going to appeal to some people, even if, psychedelic mushrooms are decriminalized. That's my belief.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, the confidence they would gain from a man in a white coat giving it to him, right? Also, the refinement.
Plus the therapist.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to get my meth in a pill too. What?
It would be weird to go to CVS though and be like, "Hi, I'm here for all my mushrooms. Thank you.
My mushroom refill."
I need my mushroom refill, sir. This is the third time this week. We can't. You've met your cap.
Yeah.
You're right. They do have caps. I need more of those. Thank you.
No stems.
It would be cool if we got to that point though, with pharmaceuticals, and you could just go. So it wouldn't have to be a CVS or a Walgreens. It was a cooler place to go pick up your.
You got
pharmacy.
to pick how your MDMA is pressed. Like, can I get the Batmans this week?
You're like, which smoke shop would you like to pick up at? The one on 4th or the...
Yeah. Well, Henry, man, thanks for coming on. Before we let you go, we got one question that we love to ask all our guests. Okay. And it's kind of redundant in nature, but what's one question that you wish more folks asked you?
What's one question I wish more people asked me? One question that, I don't know if I wish more people asked me, but I think one thing that people could afford to hear more is that focus is a skill that requires practice and can immensely benefit anything that you do. I've seen what happens when I don't apply focus and what happens when I do apply focus, and it's worlds apart. And I think just some people don't even consider that that's something that they can work on. It can be worked on through many different ways. I mentioned before, I practice yoga. I think that's really helpful for it. It kind of happens as a natural byproduct. And I also think that there is a lot of compelling anecdotal data, if not quantitative data, around people using microdosing to improve their focus. So definitely like a lot to explore there with psychedelics. I think focus is important. That's what I'll say.
Love it. Also very important to know, hey, Henry's not a dealer, just a dealer of information.
Just a dealer of facts and info
and memes. The memes are quality. So if people want to get some of those juicy memes, where do they go, Henry?
They go to tricycleday.com. Also Tricycle Day on Instagram. We're there too. That's where most of the memes happen, to be honest with you. So those are the two main things, the Instagram and the newsletter itself.
Beautiful. Well, you guys go check it out. Hey, if you found this podcast helpful in any way, we'd love it if you subscribe here. We'll show up in your feed more often. Leave us a review. It can be honest or you can lie. That helps the algorithm too. All right, guys, we'll see you next week. Love you.
See ya.